is so good to be with you all again for this April reading wrap up. It has been a very, very busy month for me, so I did manage to read quite a bit, but probably not as much as I normally would, which is okay. It was definitely an interesting reading month for me. I had a few really bad books, and I had some good ones too. I also read quite a few new releases this month, which was good. I ended up reading, I think, 11 books, and I DNF'd one. Let me start with the book that I DNF'd because it was actually my March book club read, and I really, really, really dislike DNFing my book club books. This was probably the first time that I've DNF'd, and I've been going to this book club for almost 2 years. And that book was The Buffalo Hunter. This is what the cover looks like. It has quite good ratings, but I really didn't enjoy it. I read up until page 85, but I found the writing to be really dense and struggled to make sense of what was being said. It was one of those books where you just really, really had to concentrate. Otherwise you would miss everything, and it was just didn't come at the right time for me to really be able to dissect every sentence. I was not liking the writing style, and my friends in my book club who did finish it didn't like it. Most of us DNF'd it, which again is not very common, but those who did read it didn't like it. So that was my DNF for the month. I feel like it was a deserved DNF, if I'm being honest. So I read that, like I finished it quite early I started it last month and finished it quite early, because as I said, it was my March book club book. I like to read. When I have my book club, I like to read the book within the month that it is for, but it just didn't work out this time, but that's okay. So the first book that I read this month was The Emperor of Gladness. And this is by Ocean. the name Ocean. I also do have some bad news. I really did not like this book. I gave it 1 star. I have read Ocean Vuong's other novel, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and I didn't necessarily like that novel, but I liked it better than this one. So, I don't even know where to start. I just think me and Ocean's writing don't get along very well. I have really wanted to like both books that I've read, and I just haven't. I had a really tough time with this book. Mainly because the reading experience I felt was just awful. And it really sucks as well because Ocean, we need more men like Ocean who aren't afraid to sort of open up about their vulnerability, and they're not scared of femininity, and they're not self-conscious about their own masculinity. They are just absolutely secure in who they are. I've seen a few of his interviews and they are really incredible and such a breath of fresh air. So I really like him as an author, and I really wanted to enjoy this book, but I just really hated this book. As I said, I had a really bad reading experience. I just felt that it was so overly inflated with, I don't know, just words for the sake of it. And I felt that was the same issue with On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. Like, is trying to shove as many words as he can into a sentence, but every single sentence is like that. This book centers around, I won't spoil. I feel like I'm getting really good at talking about books without spoilers, by the way. That's just a little observation of myself. This book centers around a boy who meets this older lady and ends up living with her, and it's about the boy's life away from her but also with her, and the struggles with aging. I really enjoyed the storyline between the boy, his name is Hai, and this older woman. I thought it was really beautiful, and I was way more invested in that plotline than I was just Hai, because Hai, the story like follows him when he's not with her, and I didn't care about that, I'm not gonna lie. Like, he's gotten a job and sort of follows the adventures of that, but I found that to be boring. I just wanted to see more of the relationship between Hai and this old grandma. the High and the Grandma storyline. I would have liked it a lot more. I didn't start the month out well with a 1 star, but that's okay. The next book I read, I actually listened to on audio, and it is called Departures by Julian Barnes. Departures. This was okay. I think I gave it 3 stars. I don't think I was ready for this book. At the time that I read it, I had just found out that one of my family members had passed away, and this book is very heavily centered around death. So it was like really just the wrong time, and I was not emotionally available enough to truly feel what this book was saying. I'd never read anything by Julian Barnes before, but I was looking through the other reviews, and for the most part people saying this was a really nice end to his books, which I thought was nice. And I couldn't really tell whether this was a work of fiction or if it was a memoir, because there were certain things that made it seem like it was about his life, but I couldn't tell. It could have been that it was based on his life, but the characters were fictional. I think I will definitely revisit this later in life. But as I was saying, from what I could tell from the other reviews, people say that this was definitely one of his best, and it was incredibly moving. I found his life musings and thoughts were really interesting and really thought-provoking. Definitely a lot of things in there that were you may only ponder when you are sort of close to death yourself. So I think my rating, 3 stars, is more indicative of sort of my mindset at the time, and not a fair rating based on the content of the book, which is why I think I do want to revisit it later. The next book that I read this month I also listened to, and I was lucky because my library got an audio version of this book when it came out, so that was really great, and I got in really quickly with my reservation, so I got it right as it came out, and that is Hooked by Asako Yuzuki. I enjoyed this, but it definitely had its flaws. I gave it 3.5 stars, and there was so much going on. It's quite a long book, and I think my main criticism was that the book should have finished way earlier than it did. I think from memory the book is 400 plus pages. Could have been cut down by at least 100 pages in my opinion. There is a certain point in the book where something happens. It's the grand finale, and I think it should have ended after that event happened, but it goes on for about another 100 pages, and I just thought all of that was so unnecessary. There's also a lot of subplots happening that sort of took me out of the story, and I found maybe shouldn't have been in there. Yeah. It was, I would definitely define this book as like weird girl lit. It was funny at times, and it was more one of those books where you're reading it and you're like, oh my god, what is happening? Because it's so insane. The main character, well, there's something not right. Like, it's more of like a psychological thriller, in that the main character has some sort of parasocial relationship issues, and that's a sort of central theme throughout. But I found that the protagonist and this other woman in the book were such pick-me girls. I could not stand it. Oh, I found it so frustrating. And yeah, just reading about these two characters, they seemed so insufferable. And I did find it hard to get into at first, just because it's so jarring with the main character. I'm like, oh my god, how is this woman alive still? I don't know. Like, it was very just strange. I don't want to say too much, because this is one of those books where like any small details will spoil it. But essentially it's based around, just sort of parasocial relationships and the inability of some women to make friends with other women because they just get along with men better. And there's a lot of sort of insecurities and jealousy at play. I do recommend reading it, even though I didn't think it was the best, just because I felt like it was crazy, and it was more like of a guilty pleasure read, in that, yeah, it's not the most amazing literary works. It doesn't have that much to say, but it's more of a like gawk kind of book. I think, though, it could have done with a major edit, because it was just way too long. Alrighty, the next book is actually also by the same author, and it was the book she released before Hooked, and that is Butter. I read this straight after I read Hooked, and I'm happy to say that Yuzuki's writing has gotten much better. This book I really did not enjoy. I gave it 2 stars. And as I said, I gave Hooked 3.5 stars. She's definitely improved. As much as I said that Hooked was overfilled and could have been shorter, this one 10 times worse. So she has gotten better at like coming up with an idea and sticking to a plot rather than meandering and being boring. As I said, I gave this 2 stars. this up from the bookstore so long ago. So long ago, and I just got around to reading it. Actually, funny story, I picked this up. At the time, I wasn't part of my book club yet, but this was the book they were reading at the time, and one of the girls in the book club works at a bookstore, and she recommended this book because they were reading it. And then I joined the next book club after this book. This book apparently did really, really well in Japan, where the author is from, and I think I do understand why it did well in Japan, because from what I understand, Japan still has quite traditional views on women, and patriarchy and misogyny is still very, very upheld. Not that it's not upheld in the West, but it's worse in Japan. And this book, I guess, subtly is challenging that. And I think reading it from the West, it's like, oh, it's still quite backwards, some of the views of some of the characters, but the other characters are trying to combat that in like quite subtle ways, so as to not be so overt that it upsets social norms, but to still challenge it, if that makes sense. I also thought that there had to be some type of fetish content or aspect in regards to this book, because there is so much talk about food, specifically butter, and I know that that's in the name, but when you read it, there is just so much talk about butter. And listen, I love butter, but it was too much, to the point where it was just like in the story for no reason. I don't know. The main thing this book seeks to challenge is the really unrealistic and unhealthy weight expectations of women in Japan, and I think that aspect did a really good job, especially for the Japanese context. I think in the Western context it missed the mark a little bit, but obviously this wasn't originally written in English for an English audience. It's been translated because it was such a big hit. I think the main thing that this book suffers from, though, is just a lack of direction, and it was too many pages, and the author just didn't really know where to take the story next. I think this would have made a really good novella, though, if you cut out all the fluff and make it like 100 to 150 pages. I think sort of the main part of the story could have been told in a really interesting way in that time limit, in that word limit, or page limit, I should say. library and I had to return it, so unfortunately I don't have it here. But it was the most delicious sounding hardcover book. I'm devastated that I don't have it with me. And it's called The Australian Wars: The Truth About the Bloody Battles Fought to Establish the Nation. I gave this book 5 stars. It was really, really interesting, and I recommend everyone read it if you would like to know more about Australian history told by First Nations people and academics. It was a really, really good book. Although I will say it's very triggering and heavy. I guess if you didn't know, Australia was founded on the genocide of the Aboriginal people who have lived here for over 60,000 years. It's the oldest continuous civilization of people, which is something that I think Australia should be very proud of and uplifting of, but unfortunately that's not the case. And this book sort of goes into the true history, because in school and just in general, I guess we're not told that history, and obviously history is told by the winner. So it's been completely whitewashed what we do learn in school about the colonisation of Australia. So if you're from overseas, or particularly if you are Australian, this book I think is compulsory reading, and I think it should be taught in schools because it is so important. But again, it is really harrowing and upsetting. There's a lot of photos included which are really upsetting. A few of them brought me to tears because it is just so disgusting how these people were treated. It's just really, really confronting, so I do give that trigger warning. I really enjoyed the way, I mean enjoyed is not the right word because it's such a heavy subject matter, but I appreciated the way this book was set out as well. It's sort of set out in each state. So again, if you're from overseas, Australia has, I think, 7 states, 2 territories. There's Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, and Tasmania. Have I missed any? No, 6 states. And 2 territories are the Northern Territory and the Australian Capital Territory. 6 states, 2 territories. I'm so embarrassed if I've missed one, but I think I got them all. So the book is set out in these states, and it tells the history of colonisation in each state and what happened to the Indigenous people of that area. The Indigenous people were like semi-nomadic and very much cycled through different land areas based on the season and what was available to eat, what fish were active in the waterways, etc., etc. And they also have their own nations, and I believe there's over 250 individual nations with individual languages spread across Australia. It's a really, really amazing culture, so I definitely recommend doing more research into Indigenous culture if you're interested. And yeah, I found the way that it was set out really easy to follow and easy to sort of jump around if you wanted to learn only about a specific area. The area that I'm from was mentioned, which, I mean, it's not interesting, it's really upsetting because the history of colonization here is really horrible. Each section is also written by a different author, and I found that really interesting as well because every author had their own unique voice, but it's suited to this kind of storytelling because often the author with like family ties to the area, or they are from a certain nation that falls in that state, so they do have personal history with it. Sort of made it a lot more personal, and I liked that format. So I definitely recommend this book, but do be warned, it is quite confronting and upsetting. It's definitely worth the read though, and I think, you know, these things are horrific, but it's important to not move through it, but recognize that, so we can take responsibility for what happened and then try and fix the injustice which did happen and is still happening because of white settlement in Australia and in every country that was colonized, really. But such a good book, so good. Jumping almost to the complete opposite spectrum of storytelling, the next book that I read is called HEYYYY. So this book follows the three different women from the same family at different times. One is in modern era 2019, the next is from the 1940s, and the earliest is the 1600s. And it's not a fantasy, but it's witchy vibes. I gave this book 2 stars because it just didn't meet my expectations, and I felt like a lot of it wasn't really thought through or fleshed out. It's posed as like a thriller, a witchy thriller, but I didn't find it thrilling, and it was hardly witchy. I also recommend looking through the trigger warnings if you do want to read this, because there is a lot of rape scenes, domestic violence, and they pop up at random times when you're least expecting it, so definitely be warned. As I said, it tells the story of 3 different women from the same family, but I only really felt like the middle character, the character from the 1940s, was fleshed out the other two fell quite flat, especially the modern day character. I felt like her story was really rushed, and it felt like the author was reaching the word count and needed to think of a super quick ending to finish the book. The way it's structured as well, I didn't enjoy it. Like, randomly goes through each character. For example, chapter 5 was about Violet. Chapter 5 was about Violet, who was from the 1940s. Then chapter 6 was modern day. Chapter 7 was from the 1600s. Chapter 8 was back to the 40s. Chapter 9 was the modern day. Then we're back to the 1600s for chapter 10. I mean, that follows like a cyclical order. But then we go back to the modern day. And then we go back to the 40s. It's like, doesn't follow a cycle. It's just quite random. And I felt that because of the way it was set out. It made the stories drag on for a lot longer. Because there would be chapters where it goes back and forth between two. So it goes like 40s modern day, and you would miss. It would be ages before you read about the 1600s story. So it just didn't feel like it was really cohesive. And because of this, you could literally read half the book and know nothing about one of the characters. I found that it made reading such a bore when it took so long for something to happen. I also found that the empowerment that comes from this book is mainly around the women escaping abusive relationships, but I was just like, all of them experienced that, and I was like, women can in fact be powerful and are powerful without men, and they don't need to be like leaving these horrible situations to be empowered. The book really pushes the idea of this like family curse, but it's not a family curse, it's horrible men treating these women like shit. And I felt like the family curse idea, you see it all the time in other media, but that's really detrimental to women, because as I said, it's not a family curse, it's not these women's fault, and by framing it that way, it makes it seem like it is the women's fault, the women are to blame because it's the family curse and something happened long ago that there's a curse on these women and they deserve it. But and it's always the woman's, like, it's hers to bear. So I didn't like that. The more I kept going, the more I was like, it was really pushing this angle, and I was just like, I'm over reading books where the men aren't held accountable for their disgusting behaviour. It's always the women's fault. that's my thoughts on this one. Like I said, 2 stars. The next book I read was also on audio. It's called Little World by Josephine Rowe. I did not like this book. Oh, I gave it 1 star. This, I don't have much to say, but has anyone seen 22 Jump Street? If you have, you'll know what I'm talking about, but there's this scene where one of the characters ends up at a poetry night, a slam poetry night to be exact, and he is trying to impress this girl, and he goes up on stage to perform slam poetry, obviously not prepared, and it's hilarious. But that is how this book read to me. It read to me like the slam poetry in 22 Jump Street, which is like mocking. I really dislike this specific subgenre of literary fiction. The lyricism is piled on top of each other so much to the point where you cannot understand what is going on. And again, you have to stop, dissect every sentence, analyze every sentence, and be able to understand what's going on. I feel like that is really gatekeeping reading, because it's not accessible to the everyday person. You have to be a literary genius to understand what the book is saying, and that's just not accessible. It's like part of my main problem with a lot of academic work as well is that, you know, we want people to be reading papers, we want people to be reading more in general, but if people can't understand what you're saying, it's not accessible. And no wonder people aren't reading when they're made to feel belittled because they can't understand or comprehend what something is trying to say. I know it's not big in, or it's frowned upon in academics now, but super like verbose literary writing is still common, and it's just not helpful in getting people to want to read, and we desperately need more people to be reading. I had a feeling that this author usually writes poetry, and I was right, I looked it up. But yeah, I just really didn't like this book. The next book I read was definitely my standout for the month. If I can, it's now at the bottom of the pile, there we go. And that is The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. This was like one of my new favorite books. I gave it 5 stars. It was incredible. Originally borrowed a copy from my local library, but I was loving it too much that I went and bought the actual book for myself, because I wanted to be able to like highlight and lend out to my friends and family, because I'm not going to shut up about this book for the next 6 months. When I finished it, I was hysterically crying, but in a good way, because it's just so heartwarming and lovely. I don't know how to explain it, just read it. It follows the story of this old lady named Sibyl, except it's not a traditional story. It's actually set out through, I don't know if you're going to be able to see, but it's actually set out in the form of letters and emails, correspondence. Funny that that this lady sends and receives. So we learn about her life through these letters, and she sends them to everyone. She sends them to her family, to her friends, to different authors, local newspapers, etc. She is so incredibly charming, and she just seems to be able to make friends everywhere she goes, even though she's quite old-fashioned. Like, she's quite prude and has a few sort of old man yells at cloud moments. But I just loved the way the story was told. It was so personal and just completely charms over the reader. She's also so funny. Like, there were moments where, I don't know if she is funny on purpose, but just her observations on life made me giggle. I just thought it was so funny. She's also not very good at technology, so there's a few email correspondence that I found hilarious because she's freaking out. She can't use the email, and yeah, it was really funny. I mean, at least for me, I felt every possible human emotion while reading this. It was funny, I laughed, I cried, I was heartbroken, I was like gleeful and happy. It was such a good reading experience, and Virginia Evans genuinely makes it feel like this is a real character, like these are real letters, this is a real person's life. That is my absolutely glowing endorsement for the correspondent. I always say in every video, if you read one book from this list, let it be this one, because it was so good. The next book I read is boring, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it is Community Development in an Uncertain World by Jim Ive. This was part of my curriculum for my graduate diploma in humanitarianism. It was good. Essentially, it's just an analysis of sort of the underlying systems that are causing an unequal world. So like neoliberalism, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, racism, stuff like that. It can be quite academic at times, but I found it easy to comprehend, and I think it's a really good book at sort of showing the importance of community and how we lost community, how it benefits the rich for us to remain divided, and what we can do to bring community back. I gave it 4 stars. That's all I'll speak on it because it's a uni textbook and I know that can be boring. The next book I do have a physical copy of, but I've lent it to my friend because it was this month's book club read for April. And that is Big Kiss by Claire Louise Bennett. I had the Fitzcarraldo edition as well, so you can't hear the beautiful tapping of that, so I apologize. But this book was trash. I gave it 1 star. I think if you were to ask an alien to write a novel about relationships, human relationships, and it had no knowledge or no observation of how humans interact, it would spit this book out. The way the characters speak to each other is genuinely like nothing I've ever read, in the most horrendous way possible. The blurb makes it seem a lot more interesting than it actually is, but the writing style is horrendous. So bad, every sentence was repeated 4 times. It was like said and then said again, said in a different way, and then 1 more time just for good measure, and it was just insufferable to read. Both of the characters were also insufferable. Xavier is like this guy who's married, but he is really affectionate towards the main character, but he is such a misogynistic pig. Like, he's obsessed with controlling her, and they're not in a relationship or anything romantic, so it comes across horribly. I mean, it would still come across horribly if they were in a relationship, but it makes what he does even worse, knowing that he has a wife on the side. And the main character, she just wants to be desired by men, specifically Xavier. And it's like, he treats you like shit. Why do you like him? Why do you want to be desirable to him? She tries to cut it off from him multiple times, but then she ends up not getting back with him because they're not together, but like emailing him again and re-establishing that contact. And I was screaming into the book. I was like, what are you doing? It was so frustrating. She's such a pick-me girl, but she's like old. She's like a baby boomer probably, and he's even older. He's like 90. This is like posed as a romance, but there is no romance in this story. It's another example of a book of like literally warning people about having relationships with men categorized as a romance. Because this book, like, if you're a single woman and you read this book, I completely understand why you would never want to go near a man ever again, because that's how this book reads, and like valid, but also just disgusting behavior, just diabolical. It made me angry. It's going to be a great book club talk, because from what I've seen so far, the girls that have read it have also not liked it, so yeah, it's going to be a good book club. The last book that I read this month, I listened to on audio, and that is Earthquake, the Election That Shook the Nation by Nikki Sava. This is obviously a book about the 2025 Australian election that we had last year. Essentially, everyone thought, okay, I need to explain context. In Australia, we have 2 major parties, but we have as many parties and independents, so anyone can register a party, anyone can run as an independent. It's not like America. And we have a voting system where it's called ranked choice voting, and it means that you rank So number one, so you go in, there's 5 candidates or 5 parties running for the election. You number them 1 to 5, 1 being the person you want to win, 5 the least. But if you vote, your number 1 vote gets eliminated, doesn't get enough votes to win the seat, then that vote gets put to the next person and goes down until eventually someone wins. So it's like considered a more democratic way of doing voting, because your vote will always count. It's not like, I mean, the American system is different again because there's the Electoral College, which is completely undemocratic, but we won't get into that here. Yeah, it's not just like, oh, first past the post, and there's like, oh, no point voting because this person has majority support and blah 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 blah. So it is a more like representative way of having a democratic vote. Anyway, the 2 major parties in Australia are Labor, which is, it's meant to be the left-wing party, but they're centrist, and there are the Liberals. They are the right-wing party, which sort of goes against what Americans think of, like liberals and conservatives. No, in Australia, the Liberal Party is the Conservative Party. The Liberal Party is also made up of something called the National Party, and that is also incredibly right-wing party. They form a coalition. It's complicated, but essentially they form a thing called the coalition because the Liberal Party knows they would never get enough votes on their own. The Nationals know they would never get enough votes on their own, so they form together and share. If they were to win, they share the leadership. I can do another video on Australian politics if you'd like. And for those who are new here or haven't watched my videos before, I have a bachelor's degree in politics, so I could talk about this all day. Okay, anyway, so the 2025 election, everyone thought the Liberals were going to win. Labor was in government, and it's not that they weren't doing a good job, it's that they were just boring, I suppose. And so everyone thought the Liberals were going to win, but in the 2025 election, Labor won the most seats it's ever has. It has essentially what is known as like a super majority, in that it won an incredible amount of seats, and had a really significant amount of votes, which was unexpected. Yeah, I think that's all the context you need for this book, but this book was sort of analysing that election. This author used to be a political advisor for the Liberal Party 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and so she's got a lot of sort of inside knowledge and connections in the Liberal Party that she's using to analyse the horrendous policies that they came up with. Oh my god, it was a train wreck. Their campaign was so bad, and well, that speaks to like the competency of them as a party, but yeah, I thought it was a pretty good analysis. The first part of the book is she's a columnist for a few different newspapers around Australia, and I thought her columns were really funny and interesting. She is quite witty, so I found that she very subtly can deliver absolute, like, brutal roasts in a quite, like, subtle way, so you don't really realise you're getting roasted, and she did that towards the Liberal Party, which I found was really funny. But I think it's clear because Labor won, she doesn't really have the same connections in the Labor Party as she does. The Liberals she's written a bunch of other books about times where the Liberal Party has won elections, and what I saw from other reviews was that those books are way better than this one because she has so many of those inside connections in that party, but she couldn't give the same sort of analysis for this election because she just doesn't have the connections for the Labour Party. So it was interesting, but I wouldn't say she had much, like, anything new to add to the conversation. If you're interested in Australian politics, then I would recommend reading this book because it does give a really good overview of sort of the events leading up to Labor's election in 2022 or 2023, no, 2022, and then their re-election in 2025. So yeah, it was interesting, but not that insightful. Like, the political analysis was more so interesting from the perspective of how bad the Liberals did. I also wish she sort of covered more about the Greens, which, so I said the two major parties are the Liberals and Labour. There are also other parties, as I said, there can be as many parties as there are people to make a party, but there's major party, like this, the left-wing party is called the Greens, and then like the ultra-right nationalist conservative party, essentially like the Donald Trump party, is One Nation. So yeah, there are still other parties, and there's a whole bunch of independents which run in individual electorates. So I've made it sound more confusing than it actually is. Again, if you want an Australian politics rundown video, let me know in the comments below. Anyway, all of that to say, those are the books that I read in April. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you leave a comment down below, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel while you're down there. I hope you guys had a great day or night wherever you are in the world, and I will see you in my next